Hello everyone. This is the third webinar for the RECONECT project. My name is Jess Penny and I will be your chair for today. Today's webinar focuses on the tools and indicators used within the RECONECT project in co-monitoring and the co-evaluation of nature-based solutions for hydrometeorological risk reduction. Today we have 5 talks. The first talk will be given by Rolf Wilting from Eurosense on the role of remote sensing in nature-based solutions monitoring and evaluation. The second talk will be given by Slobodan Djordjevic from the University of Exeter on the approach of indicators for nature-based solutions monitoring, and this is specifically looking at the water indicators. The third will be given by Marzena Rasmussen from Amphi, and she'll be focusing on the nature indicators. The fourth will be from Martina Viti from Ramble, and she'll be focusing on the people indicators. And the final talk will be from Marcel Alderlist from Hydrologic, and this will be focusing on the RECONECT ICT platform for nature-based solution monitoring. This will then be followed by a couple of questions and answer sessions at the end, but please write some questions in the chat and we'll try and address these at the end. If you could potentially turn off your speakers while people are presenting, that would be amazing. So thank you for listening, and I look forward to the discussions at the end of the presentations. But for now, I will pass over to Rolf for the first presentation.
Yes, hello everybody, and thank you, Jess. I will just start sharing my screen. So you should see my screen now. So my speech is on the remote sensing in nature-based solutions, monitoring and evaluation. I'm from Eurosense company, and I would like to start out with just one slide on our company group. We are active in aerial photography, LiDAR, geodata processing and remote sensing for almost 60 years. We have several branch offices in Europe. We are doing European research projects for many years, and we are also founding member of international organizations like the European Association of Remote Sensing Companies or the European Association of Airborne Survey Industries. At the beginning of each NbS project, it's important to have a good baseline mapping. We will hear more later today on the importance of the indicators, but also there is a high importance of the good definition of the data requirements. This can be the type of data, but also looking to temporal resolution. For example, is it sufficient to have just a single point of time data, or we need time series for change detection? It's important also to look to the spatial resolution. We see some example here on the land use from medium resolution, from satellite, from free satellite data. We see high resolution, for example, from commercial satellite, and very high resolution, for example, from aerial imagery. It's also interesting to look to the spectral resolution. There is a lot of remote sensing data out there, not only in the visible spectrum, but also in the infrared or thermal infrared, also radar data. So it's important, and we did this for all our demonstrator site in the RECONECT project, a very good data inventory to identify the data gaps and to discuss which additional data is needed. So data fusion is one of the buzzwords nowadays, and many stakeholders in general have already a number of good data sets available, which can be maps or statistical data. And it's important to complement them with, for example, field data and sensor data, but also remote sensing data. This can be satellite data, optical or radar. In RECONECT, we did also do some new flights for airborne imagery or airborne LiDAR. And for small-scale NbS, also UAVs can, of course, be an alternative solution. Here we see some examples of benefits of remote sensing data in NbS monitoring. Aerial autophotos can be helpful, for example, for object detection, biotop mapping, or other high-resolution mapping. LiDAR measurements can give a precise height measurements, can be used in flood simulation. We will see some examples later. Color infrared imagery are helpful for vegetation analysis and health assessments. We use it, for example, in another NbS project on urban trees. Satellite data, due to the high temporal resolution, it's very helpful for change monitoring. We use it, for example, in RECONECT for land use and land cover data. Thermal imagery is actually not used in RECONECT, but it's listed here since it's important for urban heat maps or insolation quality monitoring. And finally, 3D city models and digital twins, being actually a derivative of remote sensing data, are important for all kinds of 3D simulations. So now I would like to give you a short introduction to a typical acquisition of airborne data, which is starting with the flight planning. In the beginning, of course, the sensor settings need to be well defined, and then we apply at the regional or national ATC authorities. We start monitoring the meteo conditions. And if they are suitable, we can start the flight execution. We can see on the right-hand side the typical regular flight pattern. For the LiDAR, we also cover some cross trips, which are important for the data stability. On board, we can already have a first quick view monitoring, and immediately after landing, we do a data download and quality control to make sure that there are no data gaps. And there's no reflights needed. Coming to the data processing, as well for imagery as also for LiDAR, it starts with the GNSS processing and to compute the flight trajectories. The next step then is for LiDAR, we do a strip adjustment, and if the validation with the local reference measurements are done well, we can reach easily height accuracies of better than 10 centimeter. In most of the projects, even better than 5 centimeter in height. The next processing step is the filtering and classification. To get a digital terrain model, we want only the ground points in there. For the digital surface model, we keep also vegetation, buildings, power lines. We only filter out the moving objects. So we can see here on the left-hand side a nice classified LiDAR point cloud of the harbor of Portofino. The Portofino Park is one of the very interesting demonstrator sites. It has steep slopes and is very endangered of landslide erosion and erosion. And there was a lack in the beginning of the project of a high-precision DTM. So we executed a LiDAR flight, derived a 50 centimeter grid DTM, and the colleagues also produced some counterlines and curvature maps to identify the small terraces, which are important for the shallow landslide prevention. And they also were able to detect those terraces which need recovery and maintenance for stabilization. Another interesting example, this was already shown in the webinar too, but I think it's interesting also to show it again here, since our LiDAR data also was feeding into the flood risk modeling here. On the left-hand side, we can see the situation before the NbS implementation, and on the right-hand side, the NbS after the NbS implementation. So the dike was moved inwards, and there is more room now for the flooding and to give more room for the nature, the birds, for example, for waders. And on the other hand, the built-up areas are protected better than before for the flooding in case the water level rises further. Here is a simulation with 1.7 meter. So to conclude also, we can not only do a monitoring, we can also do evaluation from the remote sensing data, indicator evaluation before and after NbS implementation. We can do a vulnerability mapping. There is a nice map shown here on the left-hand side. It's a susceptibility map of shallow landslides in Portofino Park. We can identify critical infrastructures and elements at risk. We can do an economical damage estimation and define priority areas for action. Of course, the quality of the input data defines the quality of the monitoring and evaluation outputs. So if bad data is put in, the risk is high that there are wrong conclusions taken. Remote sensing data provides policymakers with knowledge and skills to deploy and scale up nature-based solutions. Yes, especially for water and nature indicators, remote sensing data is crucial for monitoring and evaluation. And last but not least, maps and visualizations from remote sensing data help also to promote NbS and support also stakeholder and citizen engagement. So an image can say more than 1,000 words, and if we have even 3D visualization and 3D maps, this is even better for the engagement of the people. So that's all from my side. Thank you all. And I would like to invite you to discover also the ArcGIS story map on our project website. Thank you.
Thank you, Rolf. So next up is Slobodan from the University of Exeter on the approach of indicators for nature-based solution monitoring. So I'll pass over to Slobodan.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Slobodan. So I'll be talking about water indicators and a little bit about all of them at the beginning. I don't have a slide about my company, the University of Exeter, as Rolf did. I would just say we were established under that name just a few years before Eurosense. And the Center for Water Systems that I'm a part of is celebrating 25 years of existence on 31st of August and 1st of September. So you are all invited to come to Exeter for a party if you can. This is the outline of my presentation. So as I said, I'll firstly speak briefly about how this whole methodology emerged earlier in the project. And then I'll focus on water indicators, and then I will show what those were in selection of demonstrator sites on our project, and I will make some final comments at the end. So before that, perhaps it's worth indicating why we need those indicators. On a large project like RECONECT, obviously we would like to have as consistent as possible framework methodology to look at everything that is done across several areas in Europe and beyond. Importantly, we want to be able to enable comparison before and after implementation of a particular nature-based solution. That, of course, all feeds information into the process of co-evaluation. And ultimately, longer term, we hope to be able to improve the practice and enable better design of NbS. So we started from the literature review that was published in 2017 by another European project called Eclipse. And then in several steps, we came up with the definitions of many indicators as on our project. So what you see here on the left is the framework formulated in this Eclipse project, which had 10 challenges. And that was a comprehensive literature review at that time, as I said, which was about 6 years ago. So we decided to group climate mitigation, adaptation, water management, and coastal resilience, those three things under what we call water challenges. Then we grouped green space management, air quality, and urban regeneration into what we call nature challenges and what will be nature indicators, and then economic opportunities and green jobs, public health and well-being, social justice and social cohesion, and participatory planning and governance. We grouped those challenges under people indicators. So starting then from those three challenges, then we for each of them defined 2 goals, and then for each of those a number of sub-goals, and then we defined a range of indicators, various variables that ultimately are going to be used to co-evaluate nature-based solutions. How it looked like, again, so these were various water indicators and variables, and then nature indicators, and then people indicators. Obviously, I don't expect you to read, I'm just illustrating the process, how it all emerged. And then each, so this is now a selection of some of the water indicators, and then how each of the demonstrator sites on the RECONECT project chose initially which ones they will focus on. And then also relatively early in the project, we wrote these 3 documents for methodologies for assessment of indicators for water, nature, and people. And then, as much as possible, those were used by the demonstrators. So, what those sub-water, now moving on more specifically to water indicators, what sub-goals we have here are listed here. So obviously, I was about to say most importantly, but let's not be too biased. So starting from flood risk reduction and coastal flood risk reduction, another sub-goals is improved groundwater management and drought risk reduction. Then we have landslide risk reduction, and obviously quality of water in watercourses, groundwater, and in coastal areas. And then for each of indicators within these sub-goals, we defined what the data is needed, how to assess, how to quantify that data, and ultimately how that data can be presented visually in forms of maps or diagrams, and so on. So a few examples from the RECONECT demonstrator sites on the Elbe River in Germany. For example, what this, so first of all, the challenges, the indicators that we've been looking at on this case were flood hazards and reduction in flood peak, and mitigating and storing runoff and tidal influences. So what this diagram is showing for several days is the solid line shows tidal variations, and then the 2 dashed lines show differences in flood events following some measures that were taken on the system. I'm deliberately showing again the example that Rolf showed, because it's very nicely illustrating what we are talking about here. So it shows very clearly for the same drivers of flooding how different the outcome is following a removal or repositioning of the dike, which on one hand is changing the situation in flood or in terms of flooding, but is also in terms of water situation, but is also significantly affecting other nature indicators. Also, this is all relevant for another water. In the case of Odense, it is also relevant for the situation with regard to changes in the salinity of soil. Another example is in Portofino, which is an extremely steep area where the landslide hazard can be high following heavy rainfall events, which in fact were several relatively recently. So the photograph shown here is a weir which gets inevitably damaged during extreme events, but during less extreme events they are used to minimize impacts of large soil and rocks falling down, and ultimately it's also relevant for the transport capacity of the rivers. Moving on, for example, what is shown here on this diagram for a relatively long period of time, for 2 or 3 years. The upper diagram is showing rainfall depths, and the lower series of diagrams is showing soil moisture and various water indicators. All this matters from the point of view, again, for flood risk reduction, both in terms of reducing obviously normal summer or spring and summer surface runoff, and throughout the year. And then in another Danish study in Aarhus, we are also looking at flood risk reduction, also in pollution of coastal waters, which is related to, or which affects ultimately concentrations of the dissolved oxygen. In the Thur River in Switzerland, particular problem is microplastics. So what you can see on this diagram is the scheme of the area where, for example, pumping of groundwater from the aquifers. There are rules how many days water can spend in the aquifer in order to control the possible effects of microplastics. So that is being monitored and analyzed there. Another demo sites is in one of the 2 French ones. So on the Var River, again, flooding is the challenge that we are looking at. In this case, this work is done in coordination with the National Flood Control Program. This is the acronym. Another French, won't take a risk of pronouncing the name of this place in French. So it's to do with coastal flood hazards. So the three thick blue lines that you can see are wave breakers. So that is the impacts of those and other measures on the coast are being monitored and analyzed. So in summary, I illustrated various water indicators that are monitored in the RECONECT, in some of the RECONECT demonstrator sites. The methodology that we are using for that is, as I said earlier, as consistent as it can be, considering that inevitably different sites are focusing on different challenges and are therefore choosing different indicators to look at. Just quickly to announce, so one of the following presentations will be about the RECONECT ICT platform, where many of these indicators are recorded in real time, or at least stored. And of course, as this is the whole webinar, what this whole webinar is about, these indicators then feed into co-evaluation of nature-based solutions. And the very last slide, I would just like to point out that RECONECT team also contributed to this 1,500 pages long document, so-called handbook for practitioners, where there is a lot more detail about different types of indicators. So thank you all for your attention.
Thank you, Slobodan. Okay, so the next presentation is going to be Marzena. So I'll pass over to Marzena. There she is. Cool.
Thank you very much. I will just share my screen. In a second. Oh, okay. So, good afternoon to everybody. My name is Marzena Rasmussen. I work in Amphi International private nature consulting company based in Denmark, working among others with nature monitoring. And we also became 30 years old this year, so I will not invite everybody for a celebration, but I hope we will be able to invite some. Today, in my presentation, I will give an overview of RECONECT nature indicators, few examples on how indicators are monitored, and at the end, I will share lessons learned related to monitoring of nature after implementation of NbSs. Just very fast, simplifying and setting the scene, demonstrators in RECONECT cover 3 groups of ecosystems: riverine, coastal wetlands, and mountains. Beside natural wetlands, demo sites cover also constructed wetlands as an artificial lake and climate change adaptation solutions in suburban area. Monitoring and evaluation of NbS against the nature challenges addresses questions related to habitats and biodiversity of flora and fauna. Implementation of large-scale NbSs has a potential to improve habitats, conditions, species territorial expansion, as well as colonization of new areas. And nature indicators chosen for monitoring in RECONECT focus on 2 objectives linked to the impacts of the implemented NbSs, of course. So first, shift in land cover and habitats and land use, and as well as second, maintenance and or enhancement of biodiversity. Indicators are assessing change in size of habitats and their distribution by monitoring of changes in land cover, land use before and after NbS construction, and also changes in species richness and composition, concentrating on changes in chosen groups of species, for example, protected species. The selection of objectives and indicators during the project has taken, it was a long process. I can hear some background, I think.
Could everyone turn their speakers off if you're not presenting, please?
So the choice was based on relevance of the objectives to NbS projects, as well as feasibility of the indicators for assessment and monitoring. So the data for monitoring of NbSs in the project comes from RECONECT own surveys as land cover, land use data. Rolf has mentioned this in his presentation, or targeted species habitat surveys, as well as other available resources, which can be, for example, data from existing monitoring schemes in Natura 2000 sites or Water Framework Directive. An example of NbS construction changing considerably land cover and size of habitats is a demonstration site in Denmark, Ingsø, near Aarhus. So you can see the map on the right upper corner, the location of the site. The NbS is an artificial lake built approximately 16 years ago to reduce load of nutrients delivered to the sea, but now buffers flood events, increasing retention capacity of the area. And the area is approximately 155 hectares in size, Before restoration, the area was predominantly covered by arable land. After NbS construction, the arable land was changed into water, and area of grasslands and wetlands increased approximately 8 times. Species richness and composition indicator is, for example, monitored and assessed for birds in demonstrator site Sidenstrand near Odense, Denmark. This was the same demonstrator which was mentioned both by Rolf and Slobodan. And in this demonstration site, beside the relocation of the dike close to the settlement and removal of old dikes, stream crossing the area was constructed and new depressions made or improved and woody vegetation cleared. And of course, it had impact on birds. So monitoring was started in April 2019 and is repeated every year to detect breeding as well as resting birds in the area. All birds are counted monthly from April to November, except for winter months. Focus is especially on protected and characteristic species for the habitats in the area. Oops. No, I cannot. Okay, now it works again. So the number of bird species observed bird species is similar before and after NbS construction, but number of breeding species was reduced considerably after NbS construction, and reduction concerns of undesired scrub and forest birds and follows intended impact of the NbS, indicating positive change of the habitat towards open salt meadows. Also, number of observed resting wetland and meadow bird species doubled after construction of NbS. You can see those are number of species are indicated by blue bars before NbS on the bottom of the figure, and after NbS above the red line. But not only the numbers of breeding and resting species and pairs has changed, also spatial distribution map of the selected bird groups have changed. And to the left you have a picture of before NbS, to the right 2 pictures of after NbS spatial use of the area by birds. And just to give example, if you look at the red squares, which are representing wading birds, they start to breed in the bigger area, especially southeastern part of the area after NbS construction. So we have, of course, to summarize, upscaling of urban concept of NbS into rural natural context gives some new synergies and opportunities. Like, for example, implementation of policies. It can support implementation of policies like Convention on Biological Diversity, Habitat and Bird Directives, Water Framework Directive, etc. And also to reverse degradation induced by unsuitable human activity on ecosystems, and to conserve nature, and also address the need for large-scale restoration, especially in the light of the being under preparation EU restoration law. But we need also to be aware about some challenges while designing the monitoring. For example, project timescale and the detectability of changes. For example, streams would not fully recover. Oops, sorry. After to the historical condition within 50 years. And another thing, project ends, but monitoring not. Also spatial scale, available resolution of data, indicators relevance, how big will be ecological impact area, potential for delivering benefits. Very important thing is to securing resources, financial as well as human know-how. And another, I think, very important thing is to be clear what is a required project ambition versus stakeholders' expectations. So how strong should be proof of the linkage between NbS construction and benefit to be acceptable, and monitoring versus research ability to show cause-effect relationships. That's all from me. Thank you very much, and I will give the floor to the next speaker.
Thank you, Marzena. Okay, so the fourth presentation is going to be from Martina, and she's from Ramble, and she's going to be talking to us about people indicators. So I'll pass over to Martina.
Thank you. I'm sharing the screen now.
Your screen hasn't come up just yet.
Yeah, I'm coming in.
There we go. All good.
All good? Nice, thank you. And good afternoon, everybody. Today I will be talking to you about the assessment of people indicators for nature-based solutions by using the concrete examples of the methods developed and the results obtained during my PhD at the Technical University of Denmark, or DTU. That's also a RECONECT partner. And I will start with an overview of the people indicators. This is a summary of the tables Slobodan showed, and in particular here we focus on the indicators that were chosen to be assessed by the RECONECT case studies, shown here together with their links where they're strongly linked with nature and water indicators. DTU had the task to assess specifically indicator number 10, and the challenge here, which was called enhancing attractiveness of places for living, working, and to visit. And the challenge was to try and quantitatively assess this group of intangible benefits. And we decided to tackle it with the use of a survey, and more details on this survey are coming up in a second. But by doing so, we also targeted some of the other people benefits, including here increasing recreational opportunities of the nature-based solution area, the number and value of people visiting the site, and also average journey time for people to foot to the NbS area. Now, on the survey, we specifically chose to use a willingness to pay survey or a contingent valuation survey aimed at the general public living close by or using the nature-based solutions part of RECONECT. A willingness to pay survey consists in creating a hypothetical scenario where people have to assign a monetary value to, in this case, a project, a nature-based solution project. And in this case, we included both projects that were concluded and projects that were ongoing. We created a general structure, which included socioeconomic and demographic characteristics of the respondents and their personal preferences, which, according to the literature, influence the perception and attitudes of people and towards the area, and consequently, the value that they attribute to the area. This was a generic structure, which we then searched to apply to different case studies. We managed to contact 7 of the demonstrators and to start a co-design process with the respective owners that you can see listed here. This was to give a more site-specific dimension to the general structure of the survey, at the same time keeping it comparable, so asking the same question throughout all of the 7 study sites. The distribution was also dependent on the resources of the owners of the nature-based solutions. Unfortunately, with the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, we had to do, for most part, online distribution of the survey, which was that we were able to do through different methods, depending once again on the owner's resources. So this translated into different respondents number. However, it was still very successful co-design campaign in the sense that we managed to distribute the service in all 7 sites. Now I'm looking a bit into the results and what you can expect to gather from such an application, such a method to quantify the non-tangible benefits of these nature-based solutions. And here looking at the average socio-demographic characteristics of the respondents, we could see that we got responses from people a bit older than the European average and living in smaller family groups. Also with a quite high income for average and more male respondents than female, and also living for the most part really close to the nature-based solution. So we've captured more of like a resident close to the site respondents. However, an exception to this was the Portofino Park site, where the average respondent was living 33 kilometers from the nature-based solution site, suggesting a more like visitor relationship to the area. This is further proven by the relationship to the site that we have registered. This is also across all the sites. And as you can see, for most of the sites, there's this very relationship as if it's an area close to the residence of the respondents. There's high frequency for most of the visit for most of the site, with short travel time and a short visit time. Once again, Portofino is different. It's visited less often and with a longer travel time and longer visit time, as expected. While for the Elbe Estuary site, we can see that there's a high frequency of visit, but a short travel time and a very long visit time. And this is due to the fact that the Elbe Estuary site is really large and it comprises some urban settlements, meaning that these results mostly refer to people living on site. So it's not really visit time here that we have registered, but more people living on the area, in the area. Then here you can overview of the personal preferences. We asked all of the respondents for preferences in regards to presence of green areas or biodiversity, recreation opportunities, and what we call nature-only areas, which are areas that are set aside for the benefit of nature. For example, increase of habitat, quality, and that especially that they were not accessible to visitors. And then also we've asked about the concern over the risk in the area. We asked people to grade these characteristics or concerns from 1 to 7, 1 being the lowest and 7 being the highest. As you can see throughout all of the sites, people give a lot of importance to green areas and to high biodiversity, while as expected, they're a bit less enthusiastic about the areas where they cannot visit, even though they're set aside for nature. And then there's a quite low risk concern, with the exception of the German side in Elbe Estuary and Portofino, where the concern seems to be significantly higher. Finally, we get to the evaluations and the willingness to pay questions. We've asked 2 different evaluation questions and 2 evaluation scenarios. The first one, we asked people called base willingness to pay, whether they would have been willing to pay a fee for the maintenance of the project as it was. And then we asked a second question, asking people if they would be willing to pay an additional sum on top of their initial bid if there were any nature improvements in all sites, which were specific for each site. And this is what you see as total willingness to pay. So the base willingness to pay plus this extra bid. As you can see here in the columns, the willingness to pay values are really different, varying for the base willingness to pay from 3 to 11 euros across sites. However, what was the same across all sites was that the total willingness to pay was statistically significantly higher than our base willingness to pay. So people were, throughout all the sites, were more willing to pay for the extra nature improvements. Then we ran some statistical analysis, trying to see what of the other variables that we gathered, how they influence the willingness to pay. And we could see that there's a really strong indication that higher income and interest in nature lead to higher willingness to pay. And this is something that we've seen through all sites. A bit more sporadically, we've noticed that higher concern over hydrometeorological risks and higher frequency of visit lead to higher willingness to pay. But this is not present in all the examined sites. Summing up our results, we can say that there's a positive perception of nature-based solutions in the general public, because there's been a mostly willingness to pay is present throughout all sites, and there's more value given to increase the multifunctionality. So if there's risk reduction strategy, it seems that the greener the better, at least in this European context that we've examined. And also we can see the positive sides of having a comparable data set with the same variables across sites, because we notice how similar variables influence the value given to nature-based solutions across different sites. So it's a push if you want to look at, use the same surveys throughout different sites. More like conclusions, applications, the values that we registered can be aggregated to get a overall value of the site, and also upscaled. And this, once again, the comparability of the data set will help with this. Also, the survey results are easy to present and disseminate. They can be shown to decision makers to prove that there is some extra value in these nature-based solutions, and maybe that they're appreciated by the population. The qualitative data that can be gathered, or the descriptive statistics, can be useful for the nature-based solution owners to, for example, tweak or cater or the characteristics of the nature-based solution. Maybe if the population is really keen on to recreation activities in the area, one could think to maximize the opportunities for that. And finally, a note, the method that we've used is complementary to other assessments. We have focused on the assessment of the non-market, the non-tangible benefits of nature-based solutions, but of course this is to be accompanied with other cost benefits analysis and other ways of setting, let's say, assessment of the social benefits brought by nature-based solutions. It's a piece of the puzzle, but we believe it's an important one. And thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Martina. So our last presentation is from Marcel, so I will pass over to him.
Yes, thanks very much, Jess. Let me share the screen. There we go. So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Marcel Albeliste, and I'll present something on the ICT Services Platform. And I should add straight away that it's not only my contribution here, but also from Micha from Interact and Xavi from Heights, who are both in the chat as well for any questions. So the ICT Services Platform, the scope of the platform is to be an ecosystem supporting all our demonstrators and collaborators within RECONECT in terms of data storage, analysis, visualization. As you can see in the previous presentations, quite a few number of different data points have been collected or are being collected, and the platform helps to store these and to actually analyze these data to draw relevant conclusions. So if we look at the ICT Services Platform, we can divide it into two distinct different tools. On the one hand, we've got a measure selector tool, and that's really a database of potential measures for hydrometeorological risk reduction. And it's a web-based tool that can be used by decision makers to do a preliminary selection of potential measures based on local characteristics, so that they can get an idea, okay, which are measures that could be of interest, use that selection and help them to choose relevant NbS. And then the second part is really the services platform for monitoring the NbS, so collecting real-time information from all kinds of sensor data, crowdsourcing data, modeling data, and really having the tools at hand to visualize the data, analyze it, and draw conclusions from it, and also share it. So if we look at the measure selector tool, it's a web-based tool, and it's really aimed to graphically walk you through the different potential measures. And we do not only show the nature-based solutions, but we also show the more typical gray infrastructure solutions. Think concrete, basically. Still, many people will resort to gray solutions, so we have them here to also to compare and see the distinct differences between the two. We of course hope that everybody chooses the nature-based solutions, and you can simply click through this tool. You can choose, okay, what's the hazard type that I'm trying to tackle, and depending on the hazard type you choose, you get a selection of potential measures. And these measures are then presented where possible with concrete examples that have been done in the past. So you can actually not only see what's the theoretical implementation, but you can see concrete examples with more information. And hopefully this should help decision makers in at least making a relevant pre-selection of potential measures. And well, this tool is online. The URL is here at the bottom, and we can also paste it in the chat. And you can also find it via the reconnect.eu website. If we then look to the ICT Services Platform for monitoring, this is basically our architecture picture. There are all kinds of different data sources basically at the bottom of the screen. So for example, the first presentation from Rolf from Eurosense talked about UAVs, LiDAR data, all kinds of other remote sensing data. That's a typical data source. We've got crowdsourcing data. We've got data from all kinds of various sensors. And all of those data sets are connected to the central platform, Telecontrolnet, where we store all that data. We can add further data source, for example, modeling, that we can do the flood studies that were shown in the presentations on Denmark. We can run scenario analysis, and we have a front end where people can actually interact with the data and sit together to actually evaluate the NbS. So if we look at the typical data flow of the ICT Services Platform, most common case is that it starts with sensors. So we want to measure something. Either we want to measure something for a baseline, or we want to measure and continually measure after the implementation of an NbS to actually assess the performance and ideally compare it against the baseline where possible. And those can be all kinds of various things. So for example, people counters in parks where there's recreation, we can simply count how many people are actually visiting this location. Is that number increasing or decreasing? Also more perhaps common measurements like water levels. What's the water level in the specific river or in the floodplain? Things like soil moisture sensors, temperatures, but also webcam images, for example, or more technical logger information. All of the data is collected from all kinds of various sensors, and those sensors typically have their own communication protocol. There are quite a few of them. Some use the LoRa networks, some use file-based transfers, others use simply the mobile network. And we've got the Telecontrolnet platform that is capable of talking basically all those languages. So it can really connect to all those various sensors. So it can actually pull in data from any sensor that we can basically purchase somewhere. And then it can do some analytics and checks on that data. So it can actually do some validation. Is a data point not an outlier? Should we discard it? Could even set up some alerts. For example, the water level in this specific river is above a certain threshold, so an alert should be sent out. It can do some reporting on that, but it's really aimed to be like the technical platform. And then from the Telecontrolnet platform, we're able to then distribute the data to the more public-facing interface built by Heights, where you can really try to summarize all that sensor data with additional data sets to help monitoring the NbS. For example, you can also add crowdsourcing information into there. So as I said, TeleControlNet is the central point in the ICT Services Platform, and it can pretty much talk to any sensor. And it is important because it allows any demonstrator site in our project to run their own procurement procedures to determine which sensors are most beneficial for them to buy. And we're pretty sure that we can connect it to the platform so we can actually analyze the data as well. So it's not a vendor lock-in this platform, so we're open to any type of data that we have. And once that data is connected, we have the TeleControlNet UI as like the advanced or the expert user interface, where they can investigate all the different data points that are coming in. So you see some examples here of webcam images made in wintertime. But for example, of demonstrator B site in Austria, soil moisture data is connected, and we can investigate all the various plots where the sensors are installed. And we can see all the precise details there, including things like logger batteries, voltage levels, so also some information on the actual performance of the sensor itself. And we can see, for example, the distribution of those sensors spatially, with some basic value interpretation of it. Or for example, in the Aarhus case, we've got the time series of the discharge and water levels, and we can inspect those easily over time, just to get an idea, okay, what's being measured and can we actually compare the data. So far, if we look over the project, there are 133 installations connected, or at least that was the last value reported a few weeks ago, of all the demonstrator sites and of the collaborator sites. And over a few years, we've collected 86 million data points, and that's increasing every few minutes. So we're still collecting data as we speak. And the whole idea is with all that data and all those different sensors that we're not just monitoring one single indicator or variable, but we're really measuring quite a lot. And it also, with all the different sensors, we can really start making the best informed decisions. So we, for example, we know what are the groundwater levels, what's the soil moisture, and that allows us to better or optimally steer, for example, retention basins. So really having all of those data points connected helps us in making the best possible decisions. So if we look at the flowchart, basically from operational data to actual information or intelligence, we've got the TeleControlNet platform really aimed at collecting all that data, processing that data, and making it available. And then we've got collaboration with other ICT partners, specifically Heights in this case, who can really translate that information into actual products that we can visualize online. And if we look to previous presentations, well, in the scope of NbS, there are three main indicators, so water, nature, and people. And the TeleControlNet platform connects and collects information from many different sensors. And you can imagine that there exists many different sensors for water and nature. For example, water levels, flow level measurements, those are quite easy. But the people indicator is difficult to measure with a sensor. So in the last presentation, we've seen that, that questionnaires are a very good way. But a questionnaire is not something easily to embed in the TeleControlNet platform at this time. So what we also try to do is look at crowdsourcing information. So can we actually retrieve information from the general public as an additional data source for monitoring NbS? So you can imagine, you saw nice pictures of the Portofino Park, that people recreate in that park. And well, these days, everybody has a smartphone. And it can be that people recreating there can spot issues, leaks, floodings, landslides, quicker than maybe the general maintenance of the park would. And that can be a valuable additional data set for monitoring the NbS. So we set up a crowdsourcing application in RECONECT that allows people to report a location, some remarks, can be a description of the problem they've spotted, add some photos. We could also modify to ask specific questions. For example, how do you rate this area that you've been in, or how would you improve it? So really that we try to get as much information from the general public as possible. We collect those reports, and then it's still up to experts to judge that information and, if necessary, take required actions. And here you see an example of the IJssel River, where we've got some reports. We can easily ingest these now into the platform, where we can show them on a map. We can see when was this reported, what's the message that was reported, whether or not a picture was attached. So hopefully we can then use this information in conjunction with other sensor data to monitor performance of NbS. The crowdsourcing information, or the crowdsourcing application, is really freely available for everybody. So that also means we need to check the validity of that input, as we want to make it as low of a barrier as possible for people to submit information. So it will probably need to be checked by experts, but then hopefully together with other in situ sensor data, we should be able to assess the validity, and that should help us in monitoring the performance of NbS on any of the 3 indicators. Then if we look, we've got the telecontrol platform as really the foundation for collecting all that data. We've got the crowdsourcing information for the people indicator. And then we've got the Argos NbS portal as really the front end or the web interface, how we can visualize and analyze all the different data points that we're collecting. That front end has APIs and connections with the telecontrol net system to get any sensor data that's available on the telecontrol net. And we can visualize that in the web portal. And we can then also connect additional data sets. For example, modeling outputs, the remote sensing products presented by Eurosense. We can run scenario analysis. We can really start to make comprehensive analysis of all the data we have. You've seen this picture before in presentation, so we've tried to frame this platform in such a way that we use the same classification system. So we've got the major challenges, water, nature, and people. Depending on the challenge, there are certain goals with sub-goals and ultimately specific indicators or variables. And the whole platform is set up that we use this exact same approach, so that it allows you to quickly filter through the relevant indicators that are of interest to you. So as I said, the platform has connections to telecontrol net for all the sensor data, additional European data sets, and even pilot-specific data sets, such as modeling data, of which I'll show a few examples. So this is the telecontrol net platform with the Argos connection. So now we see the Argos NbS front end, where you can present, for example, soil moisture data. That's also available in telecontrol net for the expert interface, but here we have it in a much more intuitive web platform. The beauty of this platform is also that we have public and private access, so we can control which information do we want to distribute freely to the public, but some data sets are a little bit more sensitive, and we only want to have that accessible to specific organizations or groups. And you can also see we've organized this per continent at the moment. So you see the demo sites in Europe, but we fortunately also have international collaborators in South America, Central America, and Asia. And we've also got those demo sites connected to the platform. RECONECT is a major project for nature-based solutions, but there were 2 more sister projects, Fusicus and Operandum. And we want to be a central platform, so we've also tried to include, where possible, their outcomes. So within the RECONECT NbS platform, you can actually click through to their results. So hopefully we can collect all relevant NbS information points within Europe. So if you look to the platform, you can select the challenge. Based on the challenge, you'll get a selection of goals and sub-goals you can select that filters down to specific indicators, and finally to relevant variables. So the platform uses the same logic as already outlined in previous presentations. So this is, for example, an example of the Tordera Basin. There's the public entry. You can just simply click on the website. You can find it via the RECONECT.EU project website, or there's the private entry for specific organizations in Spain to assess further data points. So, for example, common one, water challenge with flood risk reduction, tells something about water discharge measurements. So it allows us to quickly filter through those. You see, okay, we've got discharge measurements, we've got water levels, and depending on what I'm interested in, I can easily select it in the platform, and the map will update accordingly. But we do not only have the data points, we also have additional reference material. So this is simply a neutral background map, but we can, for example, add aerial photography to give a little bit more context. We can plot land use types. So we can check, okay, what's the land use type here in, for example, a flood-prone area. We've got digital elevation data, so we can check soil elevation. And all of these data sets we can easily add to the platform to further increase our knowledge of this area. And then based on the challenge, we can filter out as much data as we need. And then, for example, this is an example of baseline economic damage costs. So it's actually a calculation based on modeling on what economic damage is based on this flood-prone area. Well, you can imagine that this is sensitive information, so this is really only available behind the login here, and other data sets are more freely available. We also have the baseline flow velocity modeling and also the inundation maps. And you can see that there's quite a lot of inundation in a urban area, and therefore, well, this is one of the case studies where we hope to improve this, so that hopefully after implementation of NbS, this picture would be a lot less blue. Similar for Portofino, we've got water level sensor data connected, we've got rain gauge sensor data connected. All of that is easily accessible, coming directly from the telecontrol platform, and can be analyzed. But we can also visualize the park itself and which are the areas that are prone to landslides, in this case of the steep terraces. So we can really start making combinations with all the outlines that we can really frame all the information that is relevant for this specific NbS. Case in Denmark, as we've just seen some very nice results that after moving of the dike, there was a lot more space for the water. So we've got data points connected. All of the sensor data that's being collected is being streamed to telecontrol, and therefore available also in Argos NbS. So we can also make these analysis of the earlier slides actually within our platform, so we can also easily share it with the decision makers. But we do not only have the sensor data. The Argos platform also has connections to other European data sources, for example, EFAS, that's the European Flood Awareness System. And that's actually giving a forecast for the coming few days of all the river streams in Europe. And that helps us to also start making decisions on what should we do, for example, in the days to come. It should give us a little bit of lead time. We've also got, for example, the weather forecasts up to a few days ahead, so that hopefully we can judge, okay, that, for example, a lot of rain is forecasted, that we can check are there measures we can already take to limit potential damages. And then hopefully after the event, we have all the monitoring data to actually estimate the performance. Other data sets, for example, Eurosense data. So the high resolution LiDAR data flights are available in the platform. Aerial photography is available in the platform. Pretty much any data set we have that's of relevance for a specific demo site, we can add into this platform. And that allows us to really build up a comprehensive data set for the monitoring of NbS. So if we look to conclusions, we've got a scalable platform running in the cloud. I should really say maybe platforms. Everything is interconnected. All the RECONECT demo sites supply data to TeleControlNet, our central platform that stores it for the long run, not only during the project, but will also focus in keeping that data also after the project. And we've got the Argos NbS data viewer as a single entry point for all information, where we try to present it in an intuitive and homogenized way. So data can be analyzed in the platform, relevant subsets can be made publicly available, and this whole platform has been designed around the 3 main indicators. And with that, we hope that the platform really helps in monitoring the NbS and also do the comparison with the baselines where possible. And with that, I thank you for your attention, and I give the floor back to Jess.
Thank you, Marcel. Okay, so we're going to have a quick question and answer session. We had a few questions that were sent in for the webinar, so we're going to go through them first, and then we will look in the chat and go through those. So the first question is to Rolf. What is the minimum size for airborne survey flights in respect to the cost efficiency compared to drones?
Yeah, that's a good question and not so easy to answer. So obviously the operating a twin engine aircraft or a fixed wing aircraft is more costly than operating a drone. On the other hand, an aircraft can cover larger areas, several tens or even hundreds square kilometers within one flight mission. Yeah, operating a drone is also limited in some areas, and of course, yeah, when to cover larger areas, it will take several days. So yeah, for a good example is for Odense, we decided for the core area to cover it with a drone survey flight, while the larger area where also we took into account for the surroundings for the flood risk estimation, we decided to go with a fixed wing aircraft to have it covered by the fixed wing aircraft. It's difficult to state how many square kilometers can be covered by an aircraft in one flight mission, since this depends on a number of factors like the flying speed, the endurance of the aircraft, of course the technical settings, the sensors. So air traffic is also another factor, so it depends on a number of factors. But in general, of course, drones can be an alternative solution, especially for small-scale NbS.
Thank you. Okay, so the second question is for Marcel. Not sure what that. Anyway, so the second question is for Marcel. So how easy or complicated is it to deploy or use the platform in a new location?
It's a good question. It's actually relatively easy, as we've got the whole platform running in the cloud, and as I mentioned that the Interact platform is pretty much capable of talking to any type of sensor that is available currently on the market. So that allows flexibility for any new area to procure sensors they would like, connected to TeleControlNet, and through all the technical API connections we have with Argos platform, we pretty much have the data ready to go in Argos. And then that web-based platform has really nice modular building blocks, basically, so we can set up a new area within that platform, configure the data points that we want, so we can actually start analyzing that data. So by having everything interconnected, it's now relatively straightforward to basically scale up to any location across the world.
Cool, amazing. Okay, so next question is for Martina. So could the survey be replicated in other nature-based solution sites?
Yeah, here I am. Yes, so what we've tried to do is create a survey that could be transferred to any site. So it would need a certain degree of site specificity, or like more characteristic to be added to it. But then, yeah, ideally we could. And basically this is also sending out a message of if we have a more standardized way of assessing this people benefits, which we definitely agree it are quite tricky to pinpoint and to evaluate, it's going to be then easy to create, for example, common value functions and see if there's some variables that are relevant across even more case studies. As I mentioned, we managed to collaborate just with demonstrators, and this is a very European context, so it would be like Western and Northern European context, so it would be really nice to expand and to gather more insights and see if that changes quite a lot, or if we can maybe create a more transversal set of variables that are linked to the valuation of nature-based solutions from people and users and visitors to these sites.
Cool, thank you. And then the last one from the ones that were sent in before. So Marzena, this is a question for you. So what is the most important lesson learned from the process of monitoring nature-based solutions and the impact on the nature?
It's very difficult to decide which lesson is the most important. But definitely one of them is need of integration of the assessment of impacts on nature from the beginning of the NbS design process. So I think it will really help to define synergies. And first of all, it will help to avoid some pitfalls in planning and execution of the monitoring. I think it's really important to think upfront, to think in advance, then build the NbS, and afterwards to think what we should and how monitor in relation to nature. So recognizing nature as a benefit from the beginning, and thinking about building the monitoring program which will prove it. I hope it answered.
Thank you. So we're going to go through some of the questions in the chat. So this one is for Slobodan and Marzena, or both of you. Is ecosystem services one of the critical nature indicators that should be considered when evaluating nature-based solution projects?
Yeah, may I just start by quickly saying that the way we see ecosystem services within the RECONECT project is we see that and nature-based solutions as related concepts, really, and we see that we feel that the implementation of nature-based solutions is really meant to result in better provision, better management of ecosystem services. And what we feel is novelty in the RECONECT project is that we are bringing both, we are combining both quantitative and qualitative assessment of different things. So I would say that in general about the relationship between those two concepts, NbS and ecosystem services. Now the question was more about if ecosystem services could be nature indicators, so to speak. So perhaps Marzena would like to say something on that.
I think ecosystem services and the indicators we have chosen are overlapping to a certain degree. In general, ecosystem services are not maybe measuring the biodiversity itself very well, but indirectly, for example, pollination as a regulating service can be assessed by assessing the pollinators' diversity, what we have also done in Denmark for Aarhus demonstrator. So there are many links, and I think as Slobodan has mentioned, in our approach, we are covering ecosystem services both in water, in nature, and in people indicator sets. That's what I think I do. I hope I'm not wrong.
Thank you, Slobodan and Marzena. So the next question from the chat is for Marcel. So it's about crowdsourcing. So the question goes, I understand the participatory point of view, but how do you ensure veracity of data, and how do you ground truth the data received? Is there something to cross-check this information?
Yeah, it's a very good and also difficult question. At the beginning of the project, we did a small survey on the willingness of people to participate in sending in information. And the willingness is quite high, as in general, we've found people that are interested in nature. However, we did find that it was important to keep the barriers as low as possible. So we looked at making specific smartphone applications where we could even have registration processes, but that gave too much barriers and really declined the willingness to participate. So we made the decision to remove as much barriers as possible. So we made it simply a web-based application that anybody with a smartphone and internet connection can use it without registration or anything. And that should allow us to capture as much information as possible. However, we know that has the drawback that potentially we could have faulty reports. And therefore, I mentioned also in the presentation that it is important that experts will judge that information. So typically there's an organization or a group of organizations managing an NbS, and they would be interested in those reports, check the validity of those reports, where possible, cross-check it with maybe sensor data if available. That's not always the case. And then depending on the severity of the report, take any actions if needed. But yeah, it is a potential pitfall of these types of data points. But we made the decision to go this route to see if we can capture as much information as possible.
Cool. Thank you, Marcel. So I think we've got time for just one more question. So this is back to you, Marzena. So many of these projects have a larger social purpose in mind. For example, in Lake Agna, the project in the Greater Arthurus converts agricultural land into wetlands. In such cases, is the land held by the government or is it privately owned?
The land in the project had to be acquired from the private land owners, and the municipality has bought land, and it was necessary to construct the reservoir and manage afterwards. So I hope that's the answer, expected answer. Yeah.
Cool, thank you. So that's the end of the webinar today. So thank you to all of our presentations and presentators for your time, and thank you everyone for attending. There will be copies up of everyone's PowerPoints and a copy of this has been recorded. So if you want to re-listen, you're more than welcome to re-listen. It will be on the RECONECT website, and yet their presentations will be available to download as well. So yeah, that's all from me. So thank you very much. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.